All right, so this question does explicitly say use the quadratic formula, but when you see this highest power of 2, that is going to tell you it's quadratic, so we have 3 terms, and our first step is going to be to move everything over to one side. So if we move it over, we're going to have 3x squared plus 10x plus 5. And you'll notice that when we start scooting things over to one side, we always rewrite it from the highest power all the way down to the lowest power. So I always make sure it's x squared, x to the first, and then the constant. All right, so then I need to identify my a, b, and c. So my a is the coefficient on the x squared, b coefficient on x, c is the constant. So then we plug it into our quadratic formula, and I always write down the quadratic formula just because it makes me so happy to write it down, but I do think that by writing it down, it kind of helps you to see where everything gets plugged in. All right, so my b value, my negative b, it's always the opposite sign of whatever we have there. And then the other thing to note is this b squared, regardless of if b is positive or negative, this b squared will always evaluate out to be a positive. All right, so let's see what happens when we plug this in. Our b is 10, so we have negative 10 plus or minus square root of b is 10 squared minus 4 times the a, which is 3, times the c, which is 5. And then divided by 2 times the a, which is 3. Now, as we know, that is just half the battle plugging all this in. So let's see what we can do as far as simplifying it. So the negative 10 is just going to be negative 10, of course, plus or minus square root. Now, keep in mind, this b squared doesn't matter what's inside that parenthesis. The first number that you have inside that radical should come out as a positive. So this is going to be a positive 100. And then we need to be super duper careful about the sign of this negative 4ac. So we multiply negative 4 times 3 times 5. We multiply all three of those numbers together. There's only one negative sign, so that's going to become a negative, then 60. Okay, but be super careful about that sign. All of that multiplied together gives us our negative 60, and then divided by 6. All right, so then we plug in, or simplify, I should say. So the 100 minus 60 is going to give us a 40 over 6. Now, to simplify the square root of 40, we talked about this on an earlier question. 40, when you factor it, is 8 and 5. The 8 is going to be 4 and 2. 4 is going to be 2, 2, and 2. And I always like to bring everything down so we have a very stable tree and we don't have anything dangling out off to the side. Then, because we have a square root, we are going to understand that this has an index of 2. So we group in 2's. So these two 2's are going to come outside of the radical. Now keep in mind, it's this radical that we are reducing. So the radical was after the plus or minus. So when we bring out the 2, it's going to be after the plus or minus, just like the radical was after the plus or minus. Then the leftovers are going to stay inside the radical, and when we multiply the 2 times the 5, we'll get the 10. And the negative 10 over 6. So again, just be really careful. Square root of 40, that is being reduced as 2 square root of 10. And all of that was after the plus or minus, so the 2 square root of 10 will also be after the plus or minus. Now, one issue with this question that's a little weird is that when you look at the answer choices, you are going to see that all of the answer choices have a common denominator of 3, 6, 3, and 3. So there is some reduction that could potentially happen further, but what we need to do is we need to look at basically getting or keeping it as a common denominator. So we look at the negative 10 over 6, and so 10 over 6, we have a common factor of 2 times 5, 2 times 3, so those 2's cancel out, and we get negative 5 over 3. Plus or minus, but remember, it's like little butterfly wings. If you take something out before the plus or minus, you have to take something out after the plus or minus. So this 2 over 6 is going to factor as 1 over 3 square root of 10. Now, you can break it up into 2 separate terms, but again, when you look at the answer choices, they have combined it into one fraction. And we can do that because we have a common denominator here. So this will become negative 5 plus or minus square root of 10. And I don't have to put the 1 there as a coefficient because it's understood. And then that will all be over 3.